Hello and welcome to the Daily Climate Show. Coming up today, the UN warns that some of the world's most famous glaciers, including Kilimanjaro and the Dolomites, will disappear by 2050. Warmer and stormier weather is blamed for an increase in the number of jellyfish in UK waters. And staying with the ocean theme, we speak to the endurance swimmer Pugh, who ahead of COP27 has just completed the first ever crossing of the Red Sea. Well, hello and welcome to the Daily Climate Show, where we track the changes to our world and interrogate some of the potential solutions to the climate crisis. Now, we begin with a warning from the United Nations about the frightening number of glaciers under threat from climate change, even if the planet doesn't get any warmer than it is now. They include glaciers in Europe, North America and even Africa. Now, a third of the 18,600 glaciers monitored by the UN's cultural agency, UNESCO, are set to disappear by 2050, whatever the temperature rise scenario. Now, among those set to disappear are the Italian Dolomites in the Yosemite National Park in the US, and also in the US, the glacier in Yellowstone Park, and in Tanzania on Mount Kilimanjaro, Africa's highest point. And while the rest can be saved by keeping the global temperature rise below 1.5 degrees Celsius, if global warming continues at its current rate, about half of all World Heritage glaciers could almost entirely disappear by the end of the century. Now, World Heritage glacier lose on average 58 billion tonnes of ice every year, equivalent to the total annual volume of water used in France and Spain together. And that contributes to almost 5% of the rise in global sea levels. Our science correspondent Thomas Moore joins us in the studio. So, Thomas, it's bleak. What are the implications?
You know, until the middle of the last century, glaciers were stable. They weren't losing an awful lot of ice, certainly not more than they were accumulating during the winter. But that all changed in the second half of the last century, and it's accelerating. So we're seeing big losses of ice now, which are increasing sea levels, but also having big local effects because there are a large number of people that depend on glacier water to drink and also to irrigate their crops. Now, at the moment, it's all coming down in a flood, but in a few decades' time, it's going to completely dry up and it's going to have huge problems for people and their food security.
I suppose a real example was earlier this year, wasn't it? The avalanche, the Marmolada, the largest glacier in the Italian Dolomites. Had a huge impact.
Several people died with this huge slab of ice broke off the front of the glacier and just tumbled down into the valley. And that is an example of what is happening to these glaciers. Now, it had been 10 degrees the day before. Bear in mind, this is 2,800 metres up in the Alps. Wow. It is a phenomenal temperature. And, of course, Europe had record temperatures over the summer, and that has increased the heating. But also, there was very little snowfall over the last winter, and that will normally act as a duvet over the ice and shelter it from the very high summer temperatures. The two things combined are having a really terrible effect on the Alps and the glaciers.
Indeed, stark warnings there. Thank you very much, Thomas Moore. OK, only 3 days to go now until COP27 begins and the Egyptian Red Sea resort of Sharm el-Sheikh. We now know, don't we, that Rishi Sunak will travel there for the World Leaders Summit at the beginning of next week. Well, today, his climate minister told Sky News how concerned he was that the world is not on track to meet targets to limit global warming. But when asked about the UK's own climate pledges, Graham Stewart defended the government's controversial decision to open a new licensing round for companies to explore for oil and gas in the North Sea, saying the move will be greener in the long term.
We are absolutely focused on making sure that the Glasgow Climate Pact is converted into action. And as you say, the world is not on track for 1.5 degrees. We're managing the decline of the basin. It is expected with new licenses that it'll still be reducing at about 7% a year, faster than the globe needs to cut its oil and gas, and producing our own energy here to ever higher environmental standards. Stopping us spending billions on bringing in oil and gas from other countries. It's a weird argument when you're going to have to burn oil and gas up to 2050 and through 2050, even on net zero.
and on the great debate on Monday when COP27 will be underway, we'll be asking, can we afford to prioritise the climate? At a time when the cost of living is taking centre stage, is it possible to retain the necessary financial and political focus required to solve the climate crisis? Email the great debate at sky.uk to join the audience and share your views, and tune in at 9 next Monday evening. Now, a new farming report has warned that food companies and governments must come together immediately to change the world's agricultural practices or risk destroying the planet. The report says the pace of change in the industry has been far too slow and says it must triple by 2030 for the world to have any chance of keeping global warming under control. An increase in jellyfish numbers along the British coastline has been recorded, with warmer sea temperatures being pointed to for the rise. 1,315 jellyfish sightings were reported to the Marine Conservation Society for its annual review. This included an increase in the sightings of the Portuguese man-o'-war, a jellyfish-like creature with a sting that can be very painful, with their rise put down to stormy weather. Well, let's hope there weren't too many jellyfish around when the endurance swimmer and UN patron of the oceans, Pugh, completed the world's first swim across the Red Sea. That was only last week. Well, the swim of over 100 miles was done to draw attention to the threat climate change is posing to coral reefs, and the swim began off the Tiran Islands in Saudi Arabia and finished in Egypt, where COP27 begins on Sunday. And Lewis is calling on governments to take action to significantly cut their greenhouse gas emissions and for 30% of the world's oceans to be protected. And, well, Lewis, he joins us now. Lewis, how are you? Thanks so much for joining us on the Daily Climate Show.
Thank you so much. I'm really happy to speak to you and relieved that the swim was over. It took an awful long time, 16 days all the way across the Red Sea, very, very warm water, but relieved to have made it.
Oh, you made it, didn't you? What a journey that was for you. And it's clear that you did this endurance swim to highlight the climate crisis. But do you believe, ahead of COP27, the right people are listening?
I certainly hope so. I mean, I swam over some of the most incredible coral you can ever imagine. I mean, I swam through the Ras Mohammed National Park and just looking down the colors of the coral, the beautiful greens and the yellows and the purples and tropical fish, goldfish, sharks, manta rays, turtles. It was absolutely amazing. But the science is clear. And the science is that if we continue to heat our planet, they're really at risk. The scientists tell us that if we heat the planet by 1.5 degrees centigrade, we will lose 70% of the world's coral. If we heat it by over 2 degrees, then we're liable to lose 99% of the world's coral. And currently we're on track for way past that. So that'll be my message to the delegates at COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh. Please come and put your heads in the water. Look at the incredible coral that we have there. This supports nearly a quarter of life in our oceans, and we cannot afford to lose it.
Lewis, are you encouraged then that the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, has decided to attend?
Yes, I'm very, very happy that he's attending. You know, the climate crisis is the defining issue of our generation. Yes, he's just become Prime Minister. He's got a lot of stuff on his plate, but this is unlike anything that we are facing. It's going to impact every single person on this planet, every future generation, the whole of the animal kingdom. It's right that the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom is there supporting all efforts now to reduce our emissions and to protect the oceans further.
And Lewis, you've said that COP27, there needs to be urgent action. What do you think that urgent action needs to look like?
Well, it's two things principally. Number one is cutting emissions, and every single government has got to do it. We can't be pointing to some governments and saying they've got to do more or less. All of us have now got to put our shoulder to the wheel. And then secondly, I'm urging world leaders to commit to this target of protecting 30% of the world's oceans over this decade. And we now need to crack on. We now need to create these large protected areas. And we know that the science of them is that when we create these large protected areas, the wildlife in them rebounds. It's like creating big national parks on land.
OK, Lewis, Pugh, thank you very much for joining us, and I hope you get a well-earned rest now. Thank you.
Thank you.
And just before we go, just a reminder that ahead of COP27, beginning on Sunday, our weekly climate show with Tom Heap is back this weekend, and you can watch it on Saturdays and Sundays at 3:30 in the afternoon or at 7:30 in the evening. But for today, from the team, that's all from us. Thanks for watching.